Real-life horror stories that will haunt your every move. Be advised, it's so terrifying that 90% of people couldn't last more than 30 minutes before shutting it off. Consider this your only warning. The Static Room. Part 1. The House with Perfect Bones. Daniel Mercer did not believe in ghosts. He believed in load distribution. He believed in stress tolerances, foundation depth, shear strength, and numbers that could be calculated down to the decimal. If a thing could not be measured, it did not concern him. That was how he survived. That was how he kept certain memories contained. The house on Ashford Lane was, in his professional opinion, structurally immaculate. Built in 1948, solid oak framing, original hardwood floors still level, no sagging roofline, no hairline fractures in the foundation. Whoever built it had known what they were doing. Which made the price strange. 30% below market. The realtor had smiled too much. Owner passed quietly in the home, she said. Natural causes. Family wanted a quick sale. Daniel didn't ask in which room. He didn't want the answer. He told himself it was a fresh start. New city, new address. No one asking questions about the accident. No one asking why he left before the police arrived. The house felt warm during the day. Golden light filtered through tall windows. Dust drifted lazily in the air like suspended pollen. The staircase curved upward in a gentle arc, banister polished smooth by decades of hands. It felt safe, except for the third floor. There was only one room up there. No furniture, no staging photos in the listing, just storage, the realtor had said casually. The door was heavier than it should have been. Daniel noticed the hinges were newer than the rest of the house. He also noticed faint discoloration in the center of the wooden floor, as if something heavy had once rested there for a very long time. He didn't step inside that first day. He told himself he'd inspect it later. The first night passed quietly. Almost. At 1:17 a.m., Daniel woke up. He didn't know why at first. The bedroom was dim. He always slept with a lamp on. He didn't like complete darkness. Not since that stretch of highway where the headlights had gone out for half a second before impact. The lamp flickered. Just once. Then steadied. Daniel lay still. And that's when he heard it. A faint sound. Not from outside. Not plumbing. Not wind. It sounded like a radio tuned between stations. A soft, dry hiss. Shh. 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 He sat up. Listened. Silence. He rubbed his face. Hold wiring, he muttered. He lay back down. Turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room. And immediately... Shh. The sound was louder now. Closer. It wasn't echoing through the walls. It felt directional, as if it were inside the room with him. Daniel snapped the lamp back on. The sound vanished instantly. He stood, checked the outlets, unplugged the phone charger, disconnected the bedside clock, turned off everything he could find. He switched the lamp off again. Darkness. The static returned. Longer this time. Sustained. Like something searching for a frequency. Daniel's throat tightened. He turned the lamp back on. Silence. The room looked normal. Peaceful. He left the light on for the rest of the night. The next morning, Daniel inspected the electrical system. Breaker panel. Stable. Grounding. Intact. No cross interference. No signal bleed from nearby radio towers. He tested every room. No anomalies. Until he climbed to the 3rd floor. The air changed halfway up the stairs. Not colder. Just still. Like a sealed container that hadn't been opened in years. Daniel stood in front of the door to the storage room. His hand hovered over the knob longer than necessary. He told himself, this was irrational. He turned it. The door opened with a low, dragging sound. The room was empty, bare. Just 4 walls, a ceiling fixture, and a single outlet in the center of the far wall. The wood in the middle of the floor was darker, compressed, as though something heavy had once stood there. Daniel stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath his weight. He closed the door behind him. Even in daylight, the room felt dimmer than it should have. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight. Nothing unusual. No devices. No wires. No speakers. He turned off the flashlight. Darkness. And instantly, shh. Faint, but unmistakable. Daniel's pulse spiked. He turned the flashlight back on. Silence. He exhaled slowly, turned it off again. The static returned. Louder. Not echoing. Not ambient. It didn't sound like it was in the room. It sounded like it was inside his head. He felt pressure behind his ears, a subtle vibration in his jaw. He turned the light back on quickly. Silence. His breathing had changed. Shorter. Controlled. He did not scare easily. He was not superstitious. But this followed rules. Light off. Sound on. Light on. Sound gone. He swallowed. Turned off the flashlight once more. Darkness swallowed the room completely.
The static came back instantly. This time, it fluctuated. It pulsed. There was a rhythm to it. Breaks in the hiss. Intervals, like modulation. Daniel froze. Within the static, something shifted. Not random noise. Pattern. A rise. A drop. A compression. He leaned slightly forward. The static warped, condensed, and then he heard it. Not clearly, not cleanly, but undeniably human. A shape within the noise, a syllable trying to form. He snapped the flashlight back on. Silence crashed down like a dropped curtain. The room was empty. Daniel stood in the harsh white beam of his phone light, heart pounding against his ribs. He shook his head. No. The word came out quieter than he expected. He turned the flashlight off again. The static returned immediately. Stronger. Closer. It pressed against his eardrums. And inside it, he heard the syllable again. Distorted. Dragged through interference. But real. Dan. His name. Daniel's stomach dropped. He turned the flashlight on violently. Silence. He backed toward the door. His hand fumbled for the knob. He opened it, stepped into the lit hallway, and the sound stopped instantly, like it had never existed. Daniel had never told anyone the full truth about the accident. He had said it was sudden. He had said visibility was low. He had said he panicked. What he had not said was that he heard her breathing after the crash, that she was still alive for several seconds, that he left before the sirens arrived. He had told himself it wouldn't have mattered. He had told himself someone else would help. He had told himself many things. No one knew. No one could know. So how, in a dark room of an empty house, did something whisper his name? Daniel didn't sleep that night. He left every light in the house on. At 2:03 a.m., despite every bulb glowing, the static began again. But this time, it wasn't confined to the third floor. It was moving from the ceiling, down the walls, across the hallway, like a slow tide of sound, searching. And somewhere inside it, there was breathing.
Part 2. White noise doesn't breathe. Daniel did not sleep. At 3:12 a.m., he sat at the kitchen table with every light in the house turned on. The static hadn't stopped. It had only thinned, like fog stretching itself through vents and drywall. It no longer sounded like it came from a single location. It drifted, shifted, receded when he stood, swelled when he sat still. But it never crossed into full light. Every time he stepped directly beneath a ceiling fixture, the sound weakened. When he moved into shadow, it returned. Not random, not electrical interference. It behaved. That meant it followed rules. Daniel could work with rules. By morning, he had a plan. He drove to an electronics store and bought a handheld digital audio recorder, 2 battery-powered lanterns, a decibel meter, a portable EMF reader. He felt ridiculous at checkout. He told himself it was stress, lack of sleep, auditory hallucination triggered by trauma. Engineers verified data. They did not fear it. At 7:40 p.m., Daniel climbed to the 3rd floor. The sun was setting. Orange light spilled weakly through the small attic window. He placed one lantern in the hallway outside the storage room. He stepped inside and shut the door. Lantern off. Darkness swallowed him instantly. The static came alive. It filled the room with dry, crackling pressure. Daniel switched on the recorder. A small red light blinked. Recording. He held the device at chest level. "Okay," he said into the dark. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "If this is electrical interference, it will show waveform distortion. If it's environmental, we'll measure fluctuation." The static surged. It pulsed in uneven waves. The decibel meter climbed. 42 decibels. It peaked at 68 before dropping again. The EMF reader remained flat. No spike. No field anomaly. Just sound. And then, the static changed. It thinned in one direction, as if parting. A hollow formed in the noise. Daniel held his breath. Within that hollow, a shape of sound formed. Low, wet, almost like inhale. Daniel's skin tightened. White noise does not inhale. The sound came again. A long, dragging intake of breath inside the static field. He flicked the lantern on instantly. The room snapped back to stillness. Silence. Daniel stood frozen, chest rising too fast. He looked at the recorder. Still running. He swallowed. Turned the lantern off. Darkness. The static returned at once. Louder.
The hollow formed faster this time, and inside it, a whisper, distorted through interference. "Dan." He turned the lantern on again. Silence. This time, he didn't hesitate. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway light. The sound stopped immediately. It did not bleed past the doorway. That mattered. It was contained. Daniel replayed the recording downstairs. The first 30 seconds were normal room tone. Then, static, loud, sustained. He leaned closer to the speaker. The waveform spiked exactly as the decibel meter had shown. So it wasn't in his head. It existed physically. At 1:12 into the file, the static shifted. Daniel froze. There it was. A break in the noise. A depression in the waveform. He turned the volume up slowly.
And then he heard it, clearer than he had upstairs. A breath, long, dragging, followed by something else. Not just his name this time. Words, distorted but structured. He replayed the segment 3 times before he understood. You left. Daniel's mouth went dry. He did not say those words upstairs. He had spoken only about electrical interference. The recorder had captured something that was not present when he listened live. He scrolled back again, played it at lower speed. You left. He turned off the playback abruptly. His reflection in the dark microwave door looked pale. That phrase, those exact words, he had heard them once before, on the side of the road, through broken glass, barely audible, before he walked away. Daniel didn't drink, but he poured a glass of water and drank it like whiskey. He needed context, history. He opened his laptop and searched property records. Ashford Lane, previous owner, Margaret Halburn, deceased, age 82, cause, cardiac arrest. She had owned the house for 41 years. Before her, the Halburn family. Daniel kept scrolling. A local news archive link appeared from 1973. He clicked. The page loaded slowly. Black and white photo. Headline: Local radio hobbyist found dad in home lab. Name: Thomas Halburn. Age 34. Cause: electrocution. Found in upstairs workspace. Radio equipment melted. Police suspected faulty grounding. Daniel stared at the article. Workspace. Upstairs. He zoomed in on the image. Blurry, but unmistakable. The 3rd floor room. In the center. A large standing radio console. Heavy. Industrial. The wood beneath it darker than the rest of the floor. Compressed.
Exactly where Daniel had noticed the discoloration. Thomas Halpern had built a private radio lab in that room, experimented with frequencies. According to the article, neighbors reported strange signals interfering with their televisions for weeks before his death, static bursts, late at night. Daniel leaned back slowly. If Halpern died there, if the equipment overloaded, if something happened during transmission, what if... No, Daniel stopped himself. He didn't believe in imprint theory. He believed in circuitry. But circuits could record, they could loop, they could replay. Maybe what he was hearing was residual, stored interference, leftover energy in wiring. Except, wires don't say your name, and they don't accuse you. At 11:48 p.m., the house lights flickered. Daniel froze. He hadn't gone back upstairs. He had left the 3rd floor door closed. The static began again, but this time it did not originate from above. It came from inside the walls. A thin thread of sound weaving through insulation, traveling, testing. The kitchen light dimmed slightly. The static grew louder. Daniel stood slowly. Every overhead fixture in the house began to hum faintly. Not electrical buzzing. Something layered beneath it, a rhythm, like breathing through a filter. He backed toward the staircase. The sound followed, not random, tracking. He stepped into the fully lit hallway. The static weakened. He took another step into shadow. It surged violently, as if responding to exposure. Daniel understood then. The rule wasn't simply darkness, it was depth of shadow. The darker the space, the stronger it became, which meant the 3rd floor room wasn't just dark, it was contained darkness, isolated, sealed, engineered for it. The static spiked sharply. The hallway lights flickered twice. Then, all at once, every bulb in the house exploded. Glass shattered downward in a rain of fragments. Darkness crashed in instantly, total, absolute, and the static became deafening. It roared through the walls, through the floor, through his skull. Daniel dropped to his knees, covering his ears. Inside the static, voices layered, overlapping, distorted, and beneath them one clear phrase, repeated. You left. Closer. You left. Right beside him. You left. And then, right against his ear, breath, warm, wet, real. Daniel screamed and scrambled blindly toward the front door. He fumbled the handle.
Pulled it open. Street light poured in from outside. The static cut off instantly, like a switch thrown. Daniel stumbled onto the lawn, gasping. The house stood silent behind him. Dark, still, empty. Across the street, a neighbor's porch light flicked on. A curtain shifted. Daniel realized he was shaking uncontrollably. He looked back at the 3rd floor window. For a split second, he saw something move behind it. Not a shape, not a face, just compression, as if darkness itself had leaned forward to watch him leave. Daniel stayed outside until dawn. When the sun rose, the house looked ordinary again. Quiet, harmless. But the glass from every light fixture remained shattered on the floor. Proof. Physical. Measured. It had escalated. Stage 1 was over. The house wasn't passively replaying something. It was responding. And it had just demonstrated something new. It could manipulate the electrical system directly. It could move beyond the third-floor room, if the house allowed it to. Daniel stared at the broken window glass glittering across his living room floor. He had one certainty now. This wasn't random haunting. It wasn't residual energy. It wasn't malfunction. It was interactive. And it knew exactly what he had done. Upstairs, in the sealed third-floor room, something shifted position in the dark, waiting.
Part 3. You can leave the house. Daniel did not go back inside until the sun was fully up. Morning light flooded the house through bare windows, illuminating broken glass scattered across hardwood floors. Every bulb was shattered. Filaments hung dead inside their sockets. He walked room to room slowly. No burn marks. No signs of power surge. The breaker panel was intact. The wiring hadn't tripped. It was as if the light itself had been rejected. Daniel cleaned in silence. Swept the glass, replaced what he could. By noon, the house looked livable again. Normal. But normal had already been disproven. At 2:15 p.m., Daniel packed a bag. Laptop, charger, the recorder, a change of clothes. He didn't frame it as fleeing. He framed it as control testing. If the phenomenon was localized to the structure, distance should neutralize it. That was rational. That was measurable. He drove 40 minutes east and checked into a roadside hotel off the interstate. Second floor, exterior corridor, direct sunlight hitting the door. He exhaled for the first time in 12 hours. Inside the room, everything hummed with ordinary banality. Air conditioning, distant traffic, ice machine clanking down the hall. No static. He showered. He ate. He sat on the edge of the bed and replayed last night's recording again. You left. The words sounded clearer now, less distorted, as if the recording had stabilized. Or matured. He shut the device off. At 9:42 p.m., Daniel turned off the hotel lights. Darkness. Nothing happened. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. Silence. He almost laughed. Adrenaline crash. Trauma echo. Sleep deprivation hallucination amplified by suggestion. He lay back on the pillow, closed his eyes, and somewhere in the room, very faint, shh. Daniel's eyes opened instantly. He did not move. The sound was soft, distant, like it came from plumbing or ventilation. He sat up slowly. The static thinned, paused, then resumed. Closer. Not from the walls. From the nightstand. Daniel's pulse began to climb. He reached toward the recorder sitting beside the lamp. The static spiked. The recorder vibrated lightly under his fingertips. Not shaking. Resonating. He pulled his hand back sharply. The sound intensified. It wasn't filling the room. It was centered on the device. The recorder. He hadn't erased the file. He hadn't wiped memory. He hadn't removed the batteries.
The red standby light flickered once. Daniel whispered. "No." The static answered. Louder. Thicker. Then, breath. Right beside the bed. In the dark. Daniel lunged for the lamp and switched it on. Silence slammed down. The recorder sat motionless. No lights blinking. No playback active. He stared at it for several seconds before reaching out again. It felt warm. Not hot, but warmer than it should have been. Daniel backed away from the bed. The realization landed slowly. The house wasn't the container. The room wasn't the source. The signal had attached to him, or to what he carried. You can leave the house, but you can't leave the transmission. Daniel did not sleep. At dawn, he wrapped the recorder in a hotel towel and shoved it into his bag. He drove back to Ashford Lane. The house stood quiet beneath a pale sky. He stepped inside cautiously. Silence. He climbed to the 3rd floor, opened the storage room door. Empty. Still. He stepped in, closed the door, turned off his phone light. Darkness. The static erupted instantly. Stronger than before. Angrier. As if distance had aggravated it. He pulled the recorder from his bag. The static surged. The EMF reader in his other hand jumped for the first time. 3 milligauss. Then dropped back to 0. The air pressure shifted. The sound didn't just surround him now. It compressed inward, like walls narrowing. Within the static, 2 layers. One thin, one deep. 2 separate frequencies overlapping. And inside the deeper layer, another voice. Not the one accusing him. This one was strained, desperate, fading in and out. Help. Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't heard that before. He turned the phone light on briefly. The static dropped to a low hiss but did not fully disappear. That was new. The recorder was acting as an anchor. He turned the light off again. Darkness swallowed the room. The static roared back at full volume. The second voice pushed through more clearly. Still here. Daniel's breathing grew shallow. Still here. Who? Thomas Halpern? The article had said he died of electrocution. Alone. But the newspaper archive had been brief. Too brief. Daniel backed toward the door and opened it. The hallway light reduced the static but didn't eliminate it entirely. He stepped out fully. The sound thinned, but it followed, contained within the recorder, not bound to the room anymore.
That meant the 3rd floor space hadn't created it. It had amplified it, focused it, like a transmission tower. Daniel spent the afternoon digging deeper into 1973. Library archives, microfilm, property logs. And then he found it. A follow-up article printed 3 days after Thomas Halpern's death. Smaller headline, buried beneath local sports coverage. Wife of radio enthusiast still missing. Name, Eleanor Halpern. Age, 29. Last seen entering home night of incident. No body recovered. Police suspected she fled after the accident. Case closed 6 months later. Daniel leaned back slowly. No body. Still here. He pulled up the original photo again, zoomed into the background. Behind the radio console, a shadow in the corner of the room. Too dense, too vertical. He enlarged it further. The grain broke apart, but something was there. Not equipment, not furniture. Height of a person.
Daniel felt cold. If Eleanor had been in that room, if something happened during the overload, if both were caught in whatever Halpern had been transmitting, maybe Thomas died. Maybe Eleanor didn't. Maybe she was still in the signal, and now the signal had something else to attach to. Someone who had also left someone behind. At 11:03 p.m., Daniel tested a new hypothesis. He placed the recorder in the center of the third-floor room, stepped outside, closed the door, left the hallway light on. He descended the stairs, stood in the living room. Silence. 30 seconds passed. Then, the static began upstairs. Muffled, contained. Daniel waited. The sound built, layered, pressed against the ceiling. And then, footsteps. Not wood creaking, not structural settling. Measured steps, crossing the floor above him, from the center of the room, toward the door. Daniel's breath caught. The doorknob upstairs rattled once, then stopped. The static intensified. He realized something slowly. The recorder wasn't just an anchor. It was bait, and something inside that room had just walked toward it. Daniel did not move. He did not speak. He listened. The static thinned again, shifted, repositioned. Then, from the top of the staircase, a whisper drifted down. Not electronic, not distorted. Clear, human. You left me too. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He looked up. The staircase was empty, but halfway down, one step creaked. Underweight, invisible weight, descending.
Part 4. The shape in the frequency. Daniel did not run. Not this time. Running implied randomness, panic, loss of control. This followed structure. He needed to observe it. The staircase creaked again. One step lower. Then another. The air thickened as the static filtered down from the third floor, no longer contained, no longer distant. It wasn't just sound now. It had texture. Pressure. Daniel forced himself to breathe evenly. "Show yourself," he said. The words tasted foolish the moment they left his mouth. The step beneath the landing groaned. Halfway down, something was descending, but there was no form, no silhouette. Only a distortion in the air, like heat rising from asphalt in summer, bending light just slightly out of alignment. The static thinned, and within it, breathing. Two distinct rhythms now. One shallow, one slow, layered. Daniel took one careful step backward into the living room light. The distortion paused. The static weakened. It didn't like brightness. It tolerated shadow. It thrived in darkness. That rule held, which meant he still had leverage. The recorder upstairs crackled violently. The static surged again, but this time it didn't expand. It pulled inward, condensed. The distortion on the staircase flickered, compressing tighter, as if being reeled back. Daniel felt it instantly, like tension snapping. The thing wasn't roaming freely. It was tethered to the device. He moved fast. Up the stairs. Each step loud under his weight. The distortion retreated upward ahead of him. The third floor door slammed shut. Daniel reached it seconds later. The knob rattled in his grip. Locked. He hadn't locked it. The static roared inside the room. The door vibrated faintly. Daniel grabbed the spare lantern from the hallway table and flipped it on at full brightness. The vibration stopped. The static dipped sharply. The knob loosened. He opened the door slowly. The room was dark except for faint spill light from the hallway. The recorder sat exactly where he had left it. But the wood floor around it was darker. Not stained. Shadowed.
as if something tall had stood over it long enough to block even the faintest ambient light. Daniel stepped inside with the lantern raised. The static dropped to a low hiss. Contained. Watching. He walked to the recorder. Picked it up. It vibrated lightly again. Warm. Responsive. "You're not staying," he said quietly.
He carried it downstairs, out the front door, across the yard, to the gravel driveway. He placed it on the ground, stared at it, then went to his car. He retrieved a tire iron. He hesitated only once, then he swung. The first strike cracked the plastic casing. The static burst outward like feedback through a stadium speaker. He flinched but struck again. The screen shattered. Third strike. The device split open. Batteries rolled into the gravel. The static didn't stop. It spiked. Violently. A high-pitched shriek layered over the hiss. Daniel dropped the tire iron and stumbled back. The broken recorder twitched. Not mechanically. Convulsively. The air above it warped. Compressed. The distortion rose from the shattered casing like steam from pavement. And for the first time, it took shape. Not solid. Not complete. But suggestive. The outline of shoulders. A head tilted too far to one side. Arms elongated. Unfinished at the ends like a corrupted image failing to render. The static no longer came from everywhere. It came from within that shape. Daniel's body locked in place. The distortion turned toward him. And in the layered hiss, a voice pushed through. "You don't erase it." Daniel felt something colder than fear. Recognition. He had tried to erase the accident too. Rewrite the report. Reduce the truth to something survivable. But erasure didn't delete. It distorted. And distortion didn't die. It waited. The shape flickered. Collapsed. Then surged forward 3 feet instantly. Daniel stumbled back into the street. A passing car slowed briefly, then continued on. The driver hadn't seen anything. The distortion stopped at the edge of the driveway. It did not cross into the street light. Light was still a boundary. The shattered recorder lay smoking faintly in the gravel. But the static no longer came from it. It came from Rouse, from the 3rd-floor window. Daniel looked up. The attic light fixture, newly replaced that morning, flickered once, then twice, then exploded again. Darkness sealed the window from within. And inside that black square, he saw 2 silhouettes, one tall, one slightly shorter, standing side by side, watching. Daniel retrieved the broken recorder pieces and threw them into his trunk. He didn't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe denial. But the tether had changed. Destroying the device hadn't eliminated the signal. It had freed it from containment. The 3rd-floor room had been a transmitter. The recorder had been a receiver. Now, the house itself was broadcasting. Back inside, the static moved freely through the walls. Not loud, not constant, but present, like distant surf beneath floorboards. Daniel shut himself in the kitchen with all lights on. He opened his laptop again, dug deeper into Thomas Halpern, amateur radio logs, archived ham operator forums. He found a scanned notebook entry uploaded by a collector years ago. Thomas had been experimenting with something he called cross-band resonance, attempting to transmit and receive on overlapping frequencies simultaneously, testing whether audio patterns could imprint across bands under sustained overload. One entry stood out. If 2 signals occupy the same carrier wave at identical amplitude, separation becomes impossible. Daniel read it twice. 2 signals, same carrier wave, identical amplitude, separation impossible. Thomas and Eleanor in the room, during an overload, if both were caught inside a resonant field, if the equipment grounded through Thomas, if Eleanor was within range, 1 body found, 1 not, 2 signals merged, unable to separate, still here, still transmitting. The static shifted upstairs, not loud, but deliberate, a slow dragging movement across the 3rd-floor floorboards. Then, a knock, 3 times, measured, not frantic, not random, invitation. Daniel stared toward the ceiling. He understood something now.
The entity wasn't singular. It was layered. Thomas, Eleanor, and now, him. Because the frequency had recognized something compatible. Another unfinished transmission. Another abandonment. Another voice layered over guilt. The message had evolved. Not just accusation. Not just, you left. Now, you don't erase it. Daniel whispered to the empty room. What do you want? The static paused, thinned, and from upstairs, a reply. Clearer than before. Not distorted. Not electronic. Just human. Finish it. Daniel's chest tightened. Finish what? The transmission? The confession? The pattern? He didn't know yet. But he understood one thing with brutal clarity. This wasn't about haunting. It was about completion. And if two signals on the same carrier wave could not be separated, then the only way to stop the broadcast was to collapse the carrier entirely. Upstairs, in the third-floor room, the dark shape leaned closer to the door.
Listening, Part 5, Cross-Band Resonance. Daniel did not believe in rituals. He believed in systems, and systems could be interrupted, collapsed, destroyed. If the third-floor room had functioned as a transmitter in 1973, if Thomas Halpern had overloaded his equipment in an attempt to force two frequencies to occupy the same carrier wave, then the room itself had become part of the circuit. Structure mattered, materials mattered, grounding mattered, and fire erased circuitry. By midnight, Daniel had assembled what he needed: extension cords, fuel siphoned from his lawnmower, a portable generator from the garage. If electricity had created the problem, he would give it more, force the system into overload again, burn the carrier out. He told himself this was engineering, not desperation. At 12:41 a.m., Daniel climbed to the third floor. The static was already active, soft, anticipatory. He didn't turn on the hallway lantern. He wanted to observe full response. He opened the door to the storage room. Darkness swallowed him instantly. The static surged in welcome. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. The sound grew thicker, layered, breathing beneath it. He set the generator in the center of the room, exactly where the radio console had once stood, where the wood floor remained darker, compressed, memory embedded in grain. The static intensified. He could feel vibration in his molars. He poured fuel in a shallow line around the generator casing. His hands trembled, but he kept working. "You want it finished?" he said into the dark. The static pulsed. A rhythm formed, two layers syncing. He pulled the starter cord. The generator coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The room filled with mechanical vibration, raw electrical hum. The static reacted violently. It rose to match amplitude. Daniel felt it immediately. Two frequencies colliding, overlapping. The air pressure dropped sharply. His ears popped. The darkness thickened. Not absence of light, density. The walls seemed farther away. The room stretched. Then, sound warped. The generator's hum and the static merged, not layered, unified. A single droning tone vibrating through his spine. Daniel's knees buckled. He grabbed the wall to steady himself. And then, the room changed. He was no longer alone. The darkness shaped itself around him. The generator's metal frame flickered, morphing, expanding, becoming the outline of a towering radio console. Vacuum tubes glowing faintly red, cables snaking across the floor. Thomas Halpern stood beside it. Not solid, not whole. His body distorted at the edges like a corrupted broadcast image. Skin flickering between presence and absence. Eyes hollowed by static. His mouth opened, but the sound that emerged was layered interference. Beside him, Eleanor, half a step back, her outline less stable, her face blurred, as if she existed at a slightly different frame rate. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. This wasn't imagination. It had coherence, structure. The generator roared louder. The merged tone deepened. Thomas reached for the console.
and the air around his hand crackled. Daniel saw it clearly now. Thomas had been experimenting with forced resonance, pushing transmission power beyond tolerance, trying to make two signals occupy the same wave. He had succeeded, but the human body was not built for that amplitude. The console sparked violently. Thomas convulsed. Electric arcs tore across his torso. Eleanor screamed, but her scream folded into static before reaching full volume. Daniel staggered backward. He was witnessing it, not memory, reenactment. The moment the frequencies merged, Thomas collapsed. His body hit the floor, solid, heavy, mortal. Eleanor did not. Her outline wavered, fragmented. The static surged through her, pulled her shape apart. Not disintegration, conversion. Her scream elongated, stretched into white noise. And then, she was gone. Not dead, not present, embedded. Daniel understood with sickening clarity. Thomas had grounded the surge through his body. His signal ended. Eleanor's had not. She remained on the carrier waves, unseparated. Still here, still transmitting. The generator sputtered. The reenactment flickered. Thomas's collapsed body dissolved into distortion. The room snapped back into its bare, empty form. But the static did not weaken. It intensified. The second layer grew dominant. Eleanor's voice pushed forward through the merged tone. You left. But now, it wasn't accusation. It was recognition. Daniel's chest constricted. He saw the highway again. The shattered windshield. The woman in the passenger seat. Breathing. Barely. Her fingers twitching against broken glass. He had looked at her. He had known she was alive. And he had left. The static roared.
The generator vibrated violently. The two frequencies were synchronizing again, matching amplitude. Daniel felt it inside his ribs, like something tuning to him. The room compressed, the walls bent inward, and for a terrifying second, he felt himself thinning, edges softening, like Eleanor had. The carrier wave was trying to absorb him. 3 signals on one frequency, unfinished transmissions merging. Daniel dropped to his knees. No, he gasped. The static swallowed the word. The generator sparked. A wire snapped loose. Flames caught the fuel line. Fire burst upward along the floor. The heat was immediate, real, not spectral. The static faltered. The merged tone fractured. The wall snapped back to proper dimensions. Daniel lunged forward and kicked the generator aside. Flames spread across the fuel trail, climbing the wall. The static shrieked, high-pitched, agonized. The darkness recoiled violently. For the first time, it retreated. The voice fragmented. Don't. Daniel stumbled to the door and threw it open. Smoke poured into the hallway. He ran downstairs and out the front door as flames crawled up through the attic fence. Neighbors shouted, sirens in the distance. The static bled into the night air, then cut off sharply, like a broadcast ending mid-sentence. Fire crews arrived within minutes. By dawn, the 3rd floor was gutted, blackened beams, collapsed ceiling, the storage room reduced to char and ash. The structure still stood, but the transmitter was gone. Daniel watched from across the street, face lit by red emergency strobes. The house no longer hummed. No faint undercurrent of sound, no pressure in his ears. Silence. True silence. He felt nothing. No relief. No triumph. Just emptiness. Because he knew something now. Fire destroyed structure, but it did not separate signals already merged. It only ended amplification. The carrier had collapsed, but the broadcast had already imprinted. Inside him, that night Daniel lay in a temporary motel room provided by insurance. All lights on. No recorder. No generator. No 3rd floor. Silence filled the room. He closed his eyes slowly, and for the first time since this began, there was no static. He almost cried from the quiet. Almost. Because just before sleep claimed him, very faint, not in the room, not in the walls, but behind his thoughts, he heard a single breath, layered, waiting. Part 6. Residual Carrier. The house was gone.
Not completely. The lower floors still stood, but the third-floor room had collapsed inward like a burned lung. Insurance investigators ruled it an electrical malfunction triggered by an improperly fueled generator. Negligence. Not haunting. Daniel signed the paperwork without argument. He did not contest the findings. He did not correct the narrative. He had done that once before. Rewritten a report to make something survivable. He would not do it again.
He heard her breath, ragged but present, after the crash. He remembered the smell of gasoline, the sound of distant vehicles, and the calculation. If he stayed, there would be questions. If he left, it could be called shock, confusion, self-preservation. The static swelled as the memory sharpened. Daniel pressed his hands against his temples. Stop. The static did not stop. It synchronized. Her breathing layered into the sound, not from outside, from within him. The accident wasn't being replayed. It was being integrated. Eleanor's unfinished signal had found compatible frequency. Claire's last breaths. Daniel's guilt. 3 signals occupying one carrier. Thomas had discovered the principle accidentally. Daniel had completed it. The motel lights flickered once. Not violently. Just enough to confirm external effect. The static grew denser. And inside it, Eleanor's voice emerged. Clearer than ever before. You didn't finish. Daniel's throat tightened. Finish what? He whispered. Silence stretched. Then, tell it. Not accusation. Instruction. The static thinned slightly. Waiting. Daniel realized something slowly. Thomas had tried to force resonance without control. He had merged signals physically. It destroyed him. Fire had destroyed the amplification chamber. But the unresolved transmission remained. Unfinished narratives. Unspoken truth. The carrier wave was confession. Not electricity. Not structure. Truth. Daniel felt nausea roll through him. You want me to confess? The static did not spike. It steadied. Confirmation. If 2 signals occupied identical amplitude, separation was impossible. But amplitude could shift. One signal could be released. Finished. Grounded. Daniel's breathing quickened. If he spoke it, fully, completely, without distortion, would the carrier collapse? Or would it absorb him entirely? The motel room darkened slightly as clouds covered the moon outside. The static strengthened instantly. Darkness still amplified it. Even without the house, the rule remained. Daniel swung his legs off the bed, turned on every light in the room. The static thinned but did not vanish. He stared at himself in the mirror above the sink. He looked exhausted, older, hollow. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The static thickened. The hollow formed again. Breathing layered. Waiting. He saw Claire's face again. Her lips parting. Trying to speak.
He had closed the door. He had walked away. The truth sat in his throat like broken glass. He forced it out. I left her.
The static pulsed. Not violently, not angrily, resonance adjusting. He swallowed hard. She was alive. The hollow deepened. The breathing slowed, tuned. "I heard her breathing," he said, voice cracking. "I heard her ask for help and I left." The words did not dissolve. They did not echo. They remained solid in the air, grounded. The static flickered, faltered, but did not end. Not yet. "You lied," Eleanor's voice whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes." Silence stretched. The static thinned further, but beneath it, Claire's breathing remained, weak, persistent. He felt it inside his chest, still layered, still unfinished. Confession was not enough. He understood now. Thomas's experiment had not failed because of equipment. It failed because he attempted forced merger without resolution. The carrier collapsed violently. To end a broadcast, you don't overload it. You complete it. The motel lights flickered again, longer this time. The static rose. Darkness pooled in the corners of the room, not as shape, not as figure, but density. Daniel felt the pull, the temptation. If he surrendered, if he stopped resisting, the merging would finish itself. He would fin, fragment, join the layered signal. No more guilt, no more separation, just static. But that was not completion. That was escape. The same choice he had made on the highway. Leave. Avoid. Daniel steadied himself against the sink. "You want it finished," he whispered. The static steadied. "Yes," Eleanor breathed. "Then I don't stay," Daniel said quietly. "I don't disappear into it." The hollow shifted, uncertain. He met his own reflection in the mirror, eyes red, jaw trembling. "I go back," he said. Back to the site. Back to where Claire had died. Back to the origin of his signal. Not to erase. Not to merge. To acknowledge. Publicly. Officially. No distortion. No rewritten report. The static wavered. For the first time. It sounded unsure. Because this was not what Thomas had tried. Not what fire had attempted. Not destruction. Resolution. The motel light stabilized. The static reduced to a faint hiss. Still present, but weaker. Claire's breathing thinned. Not gone, but no longer synchronized. Eleanor's voice drifted softly. "Finish it." Daniel nodded. He understood now.
The third-floor room had amplified a lie. The highway had created one. To end the broadcast, he had to complete the story where it began, in daylight, in truth. As dawn broke through the motel curtains, the static receded to a barely perceptible thread. Not gone. Waiting. Testing. Daniel packed his bag. He did not feel relief. He felt direction. Because the next stage was not survival, it was reckoning. And reckoning could collapse a carrier wave permanently, or split it wide open.
Part 7. Open Air Transmission. Daniel drove back to the highway just after sunrise. The sky was overcast, a flat sheet of gray that made distance hard to judge. The world looked unfinished, muted. Fitting. The stretch of road where the accident had happened was 20 miles outside the city. 2 lanes, no shoulder wide enough to feel safe. Guardrail bent in one section that had since been repaired. The state had fixed the damage, repainted the lines, erased the visible scar. But Daniel knew the exact curve. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he approached it. The static began before he reached the mile marker. Soft, low, like wind pushing through dry grass. He rolled down the windows. The sound did not change. Not environmental. Internal. The carrier had followed him into open air. He parked on the gravel pull-off just beyond the curve. Stepped out slowly. The morning traffic was light. Occasional cars passed without slowing. The sky hung heavy and colorless. Daniel stood facing the guardrail. He could see it again, not visually, but perfectly. The headlights cutting out for half a second, the hydroplaning, the spin, the impact. He heard Claire's breath inside the static. Faint, persistent, layered. "You didn't finish," Eleanor whispered faintly beneath it. Daniel nodded once. He took out his phone, hands shaking slightly. He dialed the state police department. When the dispatcher answered, he spoke clearly. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I need to amend a statement regarding a fatal accident from last October." The static rose instantly, not violently, but alert. The dispatcher transferred him. A trooper came on the line. Daniel closed his eyes. "I left the scene before first responders arrived," he said. "The passenger was alive when I exited the vehicle." The words felt heavier than any he had spoken before. They did not distort. They did not thin. They landed. There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, are you saying—" "Yes," Daniel interrupted. "She was alive." The static surged. The breathing layered louder. The sky darkened slightly as clouds shifted overhead. He continued before he could hesitate. "I heard her. She asked for help. I left because I was afraid." Silence from the trooper. Then, "Why are you reporting this now?" Daniel swallowed. "Because something unfinished doesn't disappear. Because avoidance is just distortion."
Because 3 signals can't share the same carrier forever. Because it's true, he said simply. The static trembled, not aggressively, unstable. The trooper told him to remain where he was. A unit would arrive. Daniel ended the call. He felt lighter, not absolved, but grounded. The static did not disappear. It shifted. Claire's breathing remained, but it no longer synchronized perfectly with his own. There was separation beginning, amplitude changing. Wind moved across the highway. Real wind, carried scent of asphalt and distant fields. Daniel stepped closer to the guardrail. He placed his hand on the cool metal. "This is where I left you," he whispered. The static deepened, but no accusation came. Instead, Eleanor's voice emerged more clearly than ever before. "You stayed." Daniel frowned. "What?" "You stayed," she repeated. Not accusation, observation. Daniel understood slowly. Thomas had not left. He had died in the room trying to force resolution. Eleanor had not chosen to merge. She had been caught in the unfinished surge. Daniel had left. But now, he hadn't. He was standing here, admitting it, publicly. The carrier wavered. Claire's breathing shifted, from labored to distant, as if receding down a long hallway. Daniel's knees weakened. He steadied himself against the guardrail. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were not technical, not engineered, not calculated. They were incomplete, but they were honest. The static thinned further. Eleanor's voice softened. "Almost." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Almost." That meant something remained. The police cruiser appeared in the distance, approaching slowly. Daniel realized something critical. Confession to authority corrected the record. But the signal wasn't bureaucratic. It wasn't legal. It was personal. He had acknowledged he left, but he had not finished the last moment. He had not completed the transmission. He had never answered Claire. He had never responded when she asked for help. The static surged one final time. Not violently, urgently. The cruiser pulled up behind him, lights not flashing, engine idling. The trooper stepped out cautiously. Daniel barely noticed. He was focused on the sound. Claire's breath, fading, still present, waiting. Daniel turned back toward the highway, closed his eyes, and spoke into open air. "I heard you." The static stilled. "I was afraid, but I heard you."
Claire's breathing sharpened briefly, then steadied. "I should have stayed. I should have held your hand. I should have answered you." The trooper stood silently several feet away, unsure whether to interrupt. Daniel continued. "You weren't alone. I just made you alone." The words hit something deep in the carrier wave. The static fractured, like glass under pressure. The layered breathing separated. Eleanor's tone lifted upward. "Not gone, but later." "You finished," she whispered. Claire's breath exhaled once, long, soft, and did not return. The static collapsed inward. Not explosively, not violently. It folded into itself, condensed to a thin thread, then vanished. No hiss, no hollow, no layered rhythm. Only wind across open road. Daniel opened his eyes. The sky looked brighter. Not dramatically, just clear. The trooper stepped forward cautiously. "Sir." Daniel turned. His face was wet. He hadn't noticed when he started crying. "I'm ready," he said quietly. At the station, Daniel gave a full amended statement. No distortion, no minimizing language, no restructured narrative. He did not argue consequences. He did not negotiate. He finished it. That night, in a holding cell awaiting formal processing, Daniel sat beneath fluorescent lights that never flickered. Concrete walls, metal bench, uncomfortable but solid. He closed his eyes cautiously. Silence. True silence. No static. No breath. No layering. The carrier wave was gone. Not suppressed. Not weakened. Ended. Because unfinished signals don't require destruction. They require completion. But as Daniel drifted toward sleep, deep beneath memory, somewhere beyond hearing, a faint hum passed through him. Not static. Not layered. Just potential. Like distant radio spectrum waiting for occupancy. Because resonance is not evil. It is not moral. It is physics. And somewhere, in some other dark room, someone else might already be transmitting.
Part 8. After the silence. Processing took 6 hours. Paperwork, fingerprints, a formal addendum to the original accident report. The language was clinical, stripped of emotion. Subject acknowledges leaving the scene while passenger exhibited signs of life. Daniel signed it without hesitation. The words were dry, measured, but they were accurate. Accuracy mattered. By the time he was released pending further review, dusk had settled over the city. He stepped outside the station into open air, paused, listened. Nothing. No hiss beneath traffic. No thin thread of interference. Just wind and engines and distant sirens. Silence remained intact. He did not return to Ashford Lane. Insurance had declared the third floor structurally compromised. The house would require extensive reconstruction. Daniel arranged to sell it as is. He did not step inside again. He did not need to. The transmitter was gone, the carrier wave resolved. Completion had replaced distortion. That was the theory, and Daniel trusted structure. Days passed. No static. Nights passed. No layered breathing. He slept without lights on for the first time in months. Darkness returned to being absence, not presence. He noticed something subtle, though. When rooms were completely silent, utterly still, he found himself holding his breath unconsciously, waiting, testing. But nothing came. A week later, Daniel visited the cemetery. Claire's grave marker had been placed only recently. Granite. Simple. Her family stood several yards away when he approached. They had been notified of his amended statement. The legal process had begun. They knew. Daniel did not expect forgiveness. He did not ask for it. He stood before the stone and spoke quietly. "I finished it." No static responded. No shift in pressure. Only birds and distant trees. Wind across grass. He exhaled slowly. The silence did not feel hollow. It felt complete. That night, however, something changed. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just enough. Daniel lay in his apartment,
A temporary rental across town. Lights off. Curtains open to let streetlight spill across the ceiling. He felt calm, steady. He closed his eyes, and in that fragile moment between waking and sleep, he heard something. Not static, not layered breath. A single, distant tone. Pure, continuous, like a carrier wave without modulation. Daniel's eyes opened instantly. The tone did not fluctuate.
It did not build. It did not invade. It simply existed. Faint. Neutral. He sat up slowly. Listened. The tone did not respond to movement. It did not react to shadow. It did not amplify. It remained constant. Daniel felt no fear, only curiosity. He walked into the kitchen. The tone remained faint. He turned on the faucet. Water masked it instantly. He turned it off. The tone returned, unchanged. He closed his eyes again and realized something subtle. The tone was not external. It wasn't auditory hallucination. It was baseline, like blood in the ears, like electricity beneath skin. The world itself has frequency, always has. Most people never notice it. He had become aware of it because he had once occupied it. Resonance leaves memory, but memory is not haunting. It is awareness. Daniel sat at the kitchen table in darkness. He thought about Thomas Halpern, an amateur radio enthusiast experimenting beyond his understanding. He thought about Eleanor, caught in unfinished surge. He thought about Claire, breath fading on cold asphalt. All three signals had once overlapped. Shared amplitude. Distorted. Now, they were separate. Thomas grounded. Eleanor freed. Claire at rest. Daniel remained, alone on his own frequency. The faint tone continued. Not threatening, not accusing, simply present. The way gravity is present. The way silence is never truly silent. He realized something then. The supernatural had never violated physics. It had obeyed it. Unfinished emotion behaves like signal. It searches for carrier. It amplifies in darkness. It distorts when suppressed. It resolves when acknowledged. No exorcism. No destruction. Completion. Weeks passed. Court dates were scheduled. Consequences approached. Daniel accepted them. The tone never changed. It did not intensify in shadow. It did not form breath. It did not layer. It was simply the quiet hum of existence. One night, as rain tapped softly against the window, Daniel lay awake and tested himself. He turned off every light, closed every curtain, allowed the apartment to fall into complete darkness. He waited. Minutes stretched. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. No whisper formed. Only rain. And the faint neutral tone beneath perception. He exhaled. For the first time since Ashford Lane, darkness felt honest. But miles away, in a small rural town, an estate sale was underway inside a weathered farmhouse.
Among the items laid out on folding tables was an old wooden radio console. Vacuum tubes intact, grounding wire poorly replaced. A handwritten note taped to its side. Works intermittently, some static. A young man in his 20s examined it with interest. He liked vintage equipment. He liked experimenting. He imagined restoring it, improving it, pushing it beyond factory limits. As he plugged it into a nearby outlet for testing, the tubes flickered, dim at first, then brighter. The room lights hummed faintly, and beneath the surface noise, very faint, a hollow formed. Not aggressive, not aware, just potential. A carrier wave waiting for occupancy. Back in his apartment, Daniel slept without disturbance. No static, no breath, no whisper.
His signal was his own. Finished. Grounded. Complete.
Part 9. Open Channel. The farmhouse belonged to a man who had once collected broken things. Radios, oscilloscopes, old ham transmitters, anything with vacuum tubes and cracked dials. After his death, the estate sale organizers spread everything across folding tables in the living room beneath yellowed curtains. The wooden radio console drew attention immediately. It was tall, heavy, pre-1960s craftsmanship, hand-carved trim. A small handwritten card rested on top. Powers on, occasional static. Ethan Rowe liked static. He was 26, an electrical engineering graduate student with a habit of buying obsolete equipment just to see how far it could be pushed. He ran a small online channel where he restored vintage hardware. Followers loved it when he overclocked things that weren't meant to be overclocked. He crouched beside the console and inspected the back panel. Ground wire recently replaced. Solder joints messy. Power transformer aged but intact. "Yeah," he murmured, "you've got potential." He paid $50 for it, loaded it into his truck, drove it back to his workshop. That night, Ethan powered it up properly. Bench table cleared, voltage regulator attached. He replaced the power cord with a new grounded cable, checked impedance, measured baseline hum. The tubes glowed soft amber. Static filled the workshop speakers. Warm, analog, comforting. He smiled. "Let's see what you remember," he said, adjusting the tuning dial slowly. The static shifted frequencies. AM band. Nothing but hiss. He fine-tuned beyond marked ranges. The hiss deepened, thickened. He pushed the tuning knob past its mechanical limit gently. The dial needle strained against resistance. Static compressed. For a split second, a hollow formed in the noise. Ethan paused. That was interesting. He turned the dial back slightly. The hollow disappeared. He moved it forward again. There, a depression in the static, as if something were trying to occupy that space. He leaned closer to the speaker. Within the hollow, a faint tone, pure, unmodulated. Ethan grinned. Unstable frequency bleed. He loved unstable behavior. He increased input voltage slightly. The tubes brightened. The tone sharpened. The static reorganized around it. And for the briefest moment, a breath slipped through. Ethan jerked his head back. He looked around the workshop. Alone. He turned the volume down. The breath vanished. He turned it up again.
Static. Nothing else. He frowned. Probably mechanical feedback, he muttered. He began recording the output through a digital interface. If there was bleed through, he'd isolate it, enhance it, study it. Across the state, Daniel sat in his apartment grading engineering drafts. He had started consulting part-time again. Life slowly reconstructing itself. The faint neutral tone he had learned to recognize remained constant. Baseline. Unthreatening. But that night, it shifted. Not louder. Not distorted. Just displaced. Like a ripple across still water. Daniel froze mid-sentence. The tone quivered slightly, then steadied. He closed his eyes. Listened. It wasn't internal. Not entirely. Something external had brushed the frequency. Very faint, but measurable. He stood slowly, walked to the window. City lights flickered in the distance. Nothing unusual, but he felt it. Somewhere, someone had opened a channel. Back in the workshop, Ethan isolated the hollow frequency digitally. He filtered out white noise, boosted mid-range, compressed low-band hiss. The waveform revealed something strange. Not random interference. Patterned amplitude. Layered but incomplete. He slowed playback to half speed.
The workshop speakers emitted a low, dragging inhale. Ethan froze. That was not mechanical. He replayed it again. Same result. He grinned slowly. "This is good," he whispered. He increased gain. The hollow deepened. The tone strengthened. And inside it, a syllable formed. Barely audible. Hell. The lights in the workshop flickered once. Ethan laughed. Old wiring. He leaned closer. The hollow expanded. The static began to pulse rhythmically, as if adjusting to his proximity. The air felt denser, not colder, just heavier. He reached to adjust voltage again, and as his fingers touched the dial, the static snapped into full alignment. Two layers collided, merged. For one electrified second, the workshop disappeared, replaced by darkness. Not absence, containment. And within it, two silhouettes stood in the periphery of his vision. One tall, one slightly smaller, watching. The static roared. Ethan yanked his hand tap. The workshop snapped into view again. The radio crackled violently. A thin line of smoke rose from one of the tubes. He killed the power instantly. Silence flooded the room. He stood there breathing hard, heart pounding. Then he laughed shakily. "Okay," he whispered.
That was new. He replayed the recording on his computer. The waveform spiked sharply at the moment of alignment. Inside the spike, a clear phrase, not distorted, not stretched, complete. Finish it. Ethan's smile faded slightly. He scrubbed back, played it again. Same phrase. He hadn't spoken those words. The workshop had been empty. He leaned back in his chair, excited, not afraid. He didn't have Daniel's history, didn't carry unfinished signal. He had curiosity, ambition, desire to push amplitude. He whispered toward the darkened radio. "Finish what?" Silence answered. But beneath the silence, very faint, a hollow remained, waiting. In his apartment, Daniel felt the ripple again, stronger this time, not attached to him, but adjacent, like a neighboring signal tuning dangerously close. He understood immediately. Resonance is not malevolent. It is opportunity. If someone forces alignment, if amplitude matches, signals merge. He stared into the darkened window reflection and whispered to no one in particular, "Don't force it." Miles away, Ethan powered the radio back on. The tubes glowed brighter than before. The hollow deepened instantly, hungry for occupancy.
Part X, Amplitude. Ethan didn't sleep. He lived for thresholds. For the moment a system stopped behaving predictably and started revealing its limits. By 2:13 a.m., the workshop lights were dimmed. Not intentionally, just overshadowed by the amber glow of vacuum tubes burning hotter than they should. The radio console hummed with a low mechanical vibration. The hollow inside the static had returned immediately after power. Stronger this time, more defined. Ethan adjusted the voltage regulator carefully. He wasn't reckless, he was precise. He increased amplitude in small increments, watching the waveform on his laptop. White noise thickened, then thinned, then reorganized itself around a hollow like iron filings around a magnet. "Okay," he whispered. "Talk." The hollow responded. A tone formed inside it. Pure, unmodulated, carrier without content.
Ethan leaned closer. The static pulsed, and beneath it, breathing, layered, faint but undeniable. He smiled slowly. I knew it. He increased gain another faction. The tubes flared brighter. The room temperature rose slightly. The hollow widened. And then, the syllable returned. Hell. Ethan froze. That wasn't interference. That wasn't mechanical feedback. He replayed the digital capture in real time. The waveform showed 3 overlapping bands. Not 2. 3. He frowned. There shouldn't be 3. He hadn't introduced a third input. The hollow deepened. The workshop lights flickered once. The air pressure shifted. Subtle, but real. And then, inside the static, a whisper layered clearly. Don't force it. Ethan's smile vanished. That voice hadn't come through the speaker. It had formed behind him. He turned slowly. The workshop stood empty, but the shadows near the back wall looked denser, vertical, unmoving. He swallowed. Okay, he said quietly. You want amplitude? Let's see amplitude. He reached for the regulator again, and this time, he didn't increase it incrementally. He turned it sharply. Voltage surged. The tubes flared white hot. The static detonated into a solid wall of sound. Not hiss. Not breath. A full spectrum roar. The hollow expanded violently. The room lights exploded overhead. Glass rained down. Darkness slammed into the workshop like a physical force. And in that darkness, 2 silhouettes resolved clearly. Thomas. Eleanor. Not distorted now. Stable. Formed from compressed shadow.
They stood on either side of the console, watching Ethan, waiting. The static did not accuse. It did not plead. It calibrated. Ethan felt it. The tuning, the adjustment, the frequency shift aligning with him. He laughed once, but it broke midway. What are you doing? He whispered. The static answered in unison, matching. Ethan's chest tightened. The waveform on his laptop screen flattened. Carrier wave achieved. His heartbeat accelerated, and the static mirrored it, beat for beat, amplitude rising. He realized too late. He didn't need guilt. He didn't need unfinished confession. Curiosity was enough. Ambition was enough. Desire to push beyond safe limits was signal. The hollow engulfed him. The workshop walls bent inward. The console stretched taller. The air thickened. Ethan felt his edges soften, like image resolution degrading. He reached for the power switch, but his hand lagged behind his intention. Frame rate mismatch. The static roared. Thomas stepped closer. Eleanor's voice emerged. Not cruel, not angry, just precise. 2 signals cannot separate. Ethan gasped. I didn't leave anyone. The static surged. That isn't the only distortion. The waveform on the screen showed it clearly now. 3 bands merging. Thomas, Eleanor, Ethan. Amplitude identical. Carrier saturated. The workshop no longer existed. Only darkness. Only resonance. Ethan screamed. The scream stretched into white noise. Lengthened. Thinned. Converted. And then, silence. Miles away, Daniel bolted upright in bed. The faint neutral tone he'd lived with for weeks snapped sharply. Not louder, but displaced. Like something massive had just occupied adjacent bandwidth. He swung his legs off the bed and stood in darkness. The tone wavered, then stabilized. But it was different now. Denser. Not inside him. Out there. He walked to the window. City lights blinked steadily. Nothing unusual to the eye, but he felt it. A new occupancy. Another unfinished transmission forced into merger.
He closed his eyes, listened carefully. The baseline hum of existence remained, but beneath it, far away, a new hollow had formed, not calling to him, not accusing, just existing. Physics repeating, resonance obeyed. In the workshop, morning sunlight streamed through cracked windows. Neighbors had called emergency services after hearing a transformer blow nearby. Firefighters forced the door open.
They found scorched wiring, melted tubes, burned ceiling, but no body, no sign of Ethan Rowe. His laptop screen, however, still displayed a frozen waveform. 3 bands, merged perfectly, unseparated. A single line of clipped audio played softly through damaged speakers. Finish it, over and over, until the battery died. Weeks later, Daniel stood before a courtroom awaiting sentencing. He had accepted responsibility. He had completed his signal. He did not look for redemption in faces around him. He looked only for truth. When the judge spoke, Daniel listened calmly. Whatever consequence followed, he was grounded, real, not distortion, not merger. Afterward, as he was escorted out of the courtroom, he paused briefly near the window. Sunlight warmed the glass. He listened. No static, no breath. Just the quiet hum of the world functioning at safe amplitude. But somewhere, in a rural workshop now sealed with yellow tape, a faint hiss lingered in charred wiring. And somewhere else, another person might already be tuning a dial past its marked range. Because the spectrum is vast, darkness is patient, and unfinished signals will always search for carrier. Daniel closed his eyes one last time. Silence held, complete.